When you look at me this way, what do you see? Now, what do you see? We all judge. It's a normal part of being human. I have a small farm where I raise Icelandic horses, and, well, my horses could care less about my face. They don't point or stare or run away in fear. In fact, when I walk into their pen with an armload of hay, yeah. I'd better have a way to keep from being mobbed by those friendly, fuzzy beasts. Harsh conditions in Iceland may have kept them short, but they're very sturdy, and each one outweighs me by at least 500 pounds. So I've learned to use my body and my voice to maintain my space when I interact with them. My horses judge me based on my body language and the volume and tone of my voice. What if human beings judged in a similar way? What if you and I evaluated each other based on how we behave and what we say, rather than how we look? This would mean that being attractive or beautiful versus being unattractive or ugly would rely more on our choices, actions, and words. I did not choose to have a face like this. I was born with a rare tumor called a teratoma protruding from the left side of my cheek and neck. When the surgeons went in to remove it, they discovered that it was intertwined with vital structural elements of my face. So in order to extract it completely, they also had to remove bone, nerve, and muscle, leaving half my face paralyzed. Now, despite my altered appearance, my parents did not hide me away. They took me everywhere, and for that, I am extremely grateful. Because by being out in the world, I not only learned how to deal with the reactions of others, but it also proved to me that I had value. Now, in the meantime, I had a number of reconstructive and cosmetic surgeries designed to improve the function and symmetry of my face. While each one made a small improvement in my appearance, I was always hoping for a bigger result. No one ever told me that my face was going to turn out perfectly each time, but having a normal face was what I so desperately wanted that I was always disappointed when it didn't happen. When I was 21, I elected to have a procedure that would remove fatty tissue from my abdomen and use it to flesh out the contour of this side of my face. I had high hopes that this would finally be the procedure that would make a significant difference in my appearance. However, when I woke up in intensive care to the rasping sound of my own breath, I knew something had gone terribly wrong. I tried to reach up to touch my face, but I couldn't. My hands had been tied down. I'd been restrained. Now, this was not only uncomfortable, but I felt trapped, helpless. A breathing tube down my throat prevented me from being able to speak, which only fueled my frustration. Under it all, I was angry. The pain, the frustration, and ultimately the failure of that surgery, each one of those was taking a toll. Even as I recovered, I couldn't shake the intensity of those feelings. But it was then I realized I had a choice. I could choose how to go forward with my life. And when it came to having surgeries, I was done. It would be nearly 30 years before I allowed another surgeon to touch my face. Now, of course, I understood I had to go through life with a face that people are going to notice. Curiosity is normal, but being stared at is very seldom comfortable. However, in order to avoid ugly situations, sometimes we have to be proactive in the way we respond to unwanted attention. When I took my Icelandic horses to the Washington State Fair as part of an exhibit, tens of thousands of people walked through our barn. So many people would notice me that sometimes I wondered who was on display, the horses or me. Most curious looks could be diffused with a smile, a wave, and an offer to talk about my horses. One particular boy, he was probably 9 years old, was watching me intently. So I smiled and I waved his direction and, "What happened to your face?" he blurted out, much to the embarrassment of his mortified parent. But his tone wasn't mean. He wasn't intending to be rude. And frankly, I was glad that he asked rather than continuing to stare. Once he had my explanation and his curiosity was satisfied, he moved off with a shrug and a smile. Some people, instead of staring, feel compelled to interact. They'll come up to me and they'll say things like, "You're such a beautiful person." And I'll smile and say thank you, but inside, I know it's not entirely true. Because, you see, every single one of us has the capability of being ugly. And I'm not talking about having a bad hair day or a lack of fashion sense. I'm talking about the choices we make in how we act and what we say. And believe me, I have not always made the best choices. While I was writing my memoir, I met with a friend of mine I'd known since the 3rd grade. He and I had hung out with the same group in high school, and we'd been close. I was hoping that he could provide me insights to write about in my book, about my life, and he didn't disappoint. At one point, I asked him, I said, "Do you know why some of our friends don't want to have anything to do with me anymore?" In response, he nodded. "You said a lot of hurtful things, and after a while, for some of them, it just got to be too much." You know that clenching feeling you get in your gut when you realize you've royally screwed up? I felt terrible. I didn't realize what a jerk I'd been. And I had been so caught up in how I felt and how I wanted to be treated that I'd neglected to notice the effect that some of what I was saying was having on my friends. And at that moment, I understood how they felt. And not only that, I had to face one of my worst fears, and that is being rejected by people I cared about. And you know what? It had nothing to do with my appearance and everything to do with the ugly way I had treated them. But just as we all have the ability to be ugly, we all have the capability of being beautiful as well. I'm referring to how we treat others, and for that matter, how we treat ourselves. What we truly find beautiful in other people includes kindness, a sense of humor, happiness, confidence, a sense of self-worth, and a genuine desire to connect with others. While I was doing light design for a community theater production of The Music Man, I met fellow light designer Ian Shaw. It was a common interest that brought us together. My face was never important to him. As we got to know each other, we discovered more interests that we had in common. And 3 years later, we were married. One of our other common interests happens to be live music. Most of the bands and artists that we like come out and greet their fans after their performances. Because I engage with them, they tend to remember me and even know me by name, even if I haven't seen them for a while. When I first met Barry Privet, lead singer of one of my favorite bands, Carbon Leaf, we were at a record store in downtown Seattle. Now, Barry can be an imposing figure at 6'4" tall, but on this occasion, he was standing on an elevated platform behind the sales counter, making him seem even taller. I walked up to where he was standing and I looked up at his enhanced height and I said, "I know I have one of those unforgettable faces." At which point, he reached down and he cupped my face in both his huge hands, rendering me momentarily speechless. Somehow, I struggled through the rest of what I had to say. And I just wanted you to know that anytime you play in Seattle, you'll have a familiar face in the audience. It was a spontaneous connection that took me completely by surprise. I not only felt noticed, but valued by someone I admired. And as a result of that connection, Ian and I have become huge supporters of Barry's band, Carbon Leaf. We have traveled great distances to see their shows, and we've helped them out in such ways as volunteering to sell merchandise. Because you see, being memorable goes way beyond physical appearance. It's what you offer as a human being that makes that lasting impression. We all have the capability to choose how we act, what we say, and even how we see ourselves. Inevitably, those choices are going to affect how we see others and how others see us. So what it comes down to is taking control of those choices. Make the decision to feel good about yourself. Decide to be comfortable in your own skin. Because the more you recognize your value, your self-worth, the more attractive or beautiful you become. Thank you.